Security doubts black woman's authority. She's the FAA's top investigator. Something intense and unexpected took place at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport last Friday, and it all started with a quiet woman standing at the security checkpoint. Tension rippled through the line of travelers as a uniformed guard locked eyes with her, refusing to believe she had the authority she claimed. Phones came out, capturing the confrontation and confused whispers that spread across the crowd. Little did anyone suspect that this poised, determined passenger held a position of immense responsibility, one that could halt flights across the nation with a single directive. What happened next changed more lives than anyone could have foreseen. Valerie Coleman could almost feel the crackling energy in the air as her taxi glided toward Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. Though the sun had barely crested the horizon, the world's busiest airport was already pulsing with life. The monotone hum of airplanes came from every direction, underscoring the urgency. Valerie felt in her own bones. She was an investigator for the Federal Aviation Administration, one of the best, in fact. Her schedule was relentless. The day before, she had been in Washington, D.C., briefing top officials on a suspected turbine blade defect affecting a small fleet of regional jets. Now, she was here in Atlanta, summoned at dawn to address a completely separate concern involving compromised hydraulic systems in several Boeing 737 aircraft. The breadth of her expertise spanned everything from mechanical anomalies to structural vulnerabilities, and she had built a reputation for being the final word on whether a plane was truly airworthy. Despite the prestige of her position, Valerie was intimately familiar with the challenges of her role. Each emergency seemed to come with a swirl of corporate agendas, government protocols, and more often than she liked, personal prejudices. She had learned to stay calm, carry herself with professional poise, and let her performance speak for itself. This morning, though, she sensed something was different. She had been called to investigate a potential manufacturing defect that could ground dozens, if not hundreds, of planes nationwide. The stakes were enormous, and the entire airline industry would be watching. In the back seat of the taxi, Valerie clutched a sleek black briefcase standard FAA issue for investigators that held her credentials, a protective vest, and extensive documentation she had compiled overnight. On her phone, she scanned an email from the airline requesting immediate assistance. It read in part, "We suspect multiple planes have encountered abnormal fluctuations in the hydraulic pressure for the wing flaps. Pilots have reported near catastrophic control issues." She exhaled slowly, steeling herself for another high-pressure day. As she approached the main terminal, her phone buzzed again. A text from Tim Randall, a longtime colleague in the FAA's Office of Accident Investigation and Prevention, flashed on the screen. "Stay sharp. The manufacturer's giving us half answers. We need you here ASAP." Valerie typed back a quick acknowledgement before stepping out of the taxi and into the swirling currents of travelers who filled the curbside drop-off. Once inside, she navigated towards security with the swift efficiency of someone who'd flown 1,000 times before. Her standard practice was to show her FAA badge at the checkpoint if she had specialized equipment or needed expedited passage. Occasionally, this raised eyebrows. Most people rarely encountered a top-tier investigator outside of the official channels. She was used to that. Yet, there was a certain tension in the lines that morning, and as she made her way through the snaking ropes, she couldn't help but notice that several TSA officers looked on edge. The day was just beginning, and the drama was already unfolding. The security area blazed with the usual fluorescent glare. Families fumbled with laptops and quart-sized bags of toiletries, while business travelers impatiently checked the time on their phones. Valerie stepped forward, rummaging in her bag for both her boarding pass and her FAA credentials. She approached a stout TSA officer with the name tag B. Richards, who barely glanced at the documents she presented. "Monsieur A.M.," he began in a practiced tone, "I need your ID and your boarding pass." She handed them over politely. "This is an FAA credential," he muttered, squinting at the card. "What's your business here?" Valerie kept her voice calm. "I'm an accident investigator with the FAA. I have urgent clearance to reach the gate area for a priority flight inspection." She had said these words countless times in other airports, typically receiving a quick nod, followed by a routine check in the system. But Richard seemed unconvinced. "You're with the FAA?" He glanced at Valerie, taking in her composed face and professional attire. Then he peered again at the badge. "I don't see many of you folks, especially not at this hour. Let me call this in." Though a small line had formed behind her, Richards stepped away from his podium to make a phone call. Valerie felt the impatient stares of fellow travelers behind her. A few looked annoyed, others curious. She took a measured breath, telling herself that everyone was just doing their job. However, she couldn't ignore the creeping sensation that something more personal was at play. Moments later, Richards returned, scowling. "I can't get through to the local contact who usually verifies these things. You'll have to go to secondary. Please step aside." Valerie raised an eyebrow. "I'm on a tight schedule. If you run my badge through the standard database, you should see my clearance. Alternatively, I have a direct line to the FAA duty officer, MAAM." He cut her off, his tone abruptly rigid. "Please step aside and follow that officer. We can't just let you breeze through on a claim. Anybody could print up a fancy badge." Gritting her teeth, Valerie grabbed her briefcase and stepped into the secondary screening zone, a small, glass-enclosed area adjacent to the main checkpoint. An awkward silence filled the space as two other TSA officers hovered near the X-ray machine, awaiting instructions. She handed over her phone when requested, her mind racing with the knowledge that time was slipping through her fingers. If her flight left without her, the investigation in Seattle would be delayed, a delay that could literally mean the difference between life and death if the rumored hydraulic defect proved critical. In secondary screening, Valerie stood in stocking feet as one of the officers methodically searched her shoes. Another officer, tall and wiry, studied her FAA badge as if it were an alien artifact. Every minute felt like an hour. She overheard Richards on the phone again, his voice tense. The overhead airport announcements droned about baggage and gate changes, but Valerie's focus was on the ticking clock inside her head. She had encountered wariness before, but the undertone of hostility was unusual. Her credentials were legitimate and up-to-date, complete with her photo, holographic features, and official seals. The FAA's primary database would confirm her status as soon as anyone cared to check it properly. Yet, the process dragged on. It was at moments like this that Valerie felt the weight of her identity. A black woman, relatively young for her rank, telling people she possessed top-level investigative authority in the most critical aspects of aviation safety. Some believed her on the spot, others seemed to need extra proof. She remained patient, reminding herself that the best way to handle the situation was to cooperate, maintain composure, and let the official verification speak for itself. Finally, a supervising TSA agent with salt and pepper hair came in. His badge read Supervisor Mullins. He approached Valerie, looked at her documents, and tapped something into a computer. Within seconds, his stern expression softened. "Miss Coleman, the first C, you're on an urgent assignment. I apologize for the inconvenience. You're free to go." "Thank you," she said, refraining from letting out a long sigh of relief. She grabbed her shoes, her briefcase, and her phone. As she prepared to head for her gate, she caught Richard's eye across the room. He stared at her with an expression that mingled disbelief and resentment. She wondered if he'd ever consider that he might have acted on unconscious bias, or if he genuinely believed that a top investigator couldn't possibly look like her. By the time Valerie reached her gate, boarding had already begun. She squeezed into the priority line, showing the gate agent her boarding pass. At last, she breathed easier as she made her way down the jet bridge and into the cabin. The flight was bound for Seattle-Tacoma International, a journey of about 5 hours, which gave her some precious time to review the data she already had. Settling into her seat, she opened her laptop and scanned engineering notes regarding the Boeing 737 series she had been summoned to inspect. Hydraulic fluctuations affecting the wing flaps could lead to partial or complete loss of control surfaces, and that was a non-negotiable safety threat. A single oversight could cause catastrophic consequences, jeopardizing everyone on board. As the plane taxied away from the gate, Valerie noticed a swirl of mixed emotions. She was relieved to be on her way, yet a tightness in her chest reminded her of the frustration she had just endured. Her thoughts drifted back to Richard's. She could still see his disapproving glare, hear his dismissive words. Her father's voice echoed in her head. "Prove them wrong by doing your job. So well they can't ignore you." He had told her that when she first joined the FAA. Now, in a seat thousands of feet above the ground, she clung to those words like a lifeline. After takeoff, she found her concentration returning to the task at hand. She pored over technical bulletins from Boeing, airworthiness directive notices, and real-time messages from Tim. The drama at the airport security gate was now just a side note in the flurry of responsibilities swirling around her. Safety demanded her full attention, and she intended to give it nothing less. When the plane touched down at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, a cold rain splashed across the runway. It was typical Pacific Northwest weather, gray skies, and a damp chill. Valerie wasted no time collecting her luggage and heading straight for the car rental desk. She had arranged a vehicle in advance, anticipating that she'd need to shuttle between the commercial terminals and the maintenance hangars situated on the outskirts of the airport property. Within minutes, she was driving down service roads flanked by chain-link fencing and security cameras. The smell of jet fuel hung in the air. Soon she arrived at a large hangar belonging to a major airline, let's call it Cascadia Air, to find Tim Randall waiting for her near a heavy steel door. Tall and fair-haired, Tim was an experienced FAA investigator with a specialty in cockpit procedures. He waved as soon as he saw her. "Val, you made it," Tim said, his tone a mixture of relief and urgency. They shook hands quickly. "Barely," Valerie replied, choosing not to elaborate on her ordeal in Atlanta. "Any new developments?" "A few, and they're not good," Tim said as he ushered her inside. They stepped into a cavernous space dominated by the exposed skeleton of a Boeing 737. Cowlings were removed. Engine parts lay carefully organized on large wheeled tables, and hydraulic lines snaked across the floor like veins in a dissected organism. The smell of grease and solvent was overpowering. Mechanics in coveralls bustled about, heads bent over checklists, the air filled with the sound of metallic clanks and power tools. Tim led Valerie to a makeshift office, a small partitioned space in the corner of the hangar. Inside waited Ron Jacobs, a lead mechanic for Cascadia Air, and Dr. Sarah Knorr, an aviation engineer specializing in fluid dynamics. They were hunched over a set of technical diagrams. "Valerie, this is Ron and Dr. Knorr," Tim said, gesturing. They've been analyzing the abnormal hydraulic issues. Dr. Noor extended a hand, her expression serious. Pleased to meet you, Miss Coleman. We've heard a lot about your work, and we're glad you're here. The data suggests we might have a design flaw, or possibly a manufacturing defect, in the servo valve assembly. Ron nodded in agreement. We've got 3 planes out of service with nearly identical problems. We can't afford to risk more flights until we know exactly what's going on. Valerie studied the diagrams on the table, each displaying cross-sections of the 737 swing flap hydraulics. She could immediately spot areas where pressure irregularities might occur if a valve component were misaligned or made from subpar materials. The longer she looked, the more concerned she became. This could ground a significant portion of the fleet if the part in question is widely used, Valerie said, her words measured. We need to verify the scope. Dr. Noor, do you have the part numbers and manufacturing batches? If these came from a specific supplier like Parker Hannifin, Crane Aerospace, or any subcontractor, they might have distributed these valves to multiple airlines. Dr. Noor glanced at a spreadsheet on her laptop. They're from an older batch of valves produced under a Boeing subcontract. Records indicate a portion were manufactured at a facility in Everett under a rush order about 4 years ago. We suspect quality checks might have been compromised. Tim took out his phone to message FAA HQ. I'll alert the rest of the team. Valerie, you and I both know this can escalate fast if we don't act. Nodding, Valerie steeled herself for the long hours ahead. The memory of Richard's scorn lingered in her mind, but she brushed it off. There were bigger issues to tackle here, issues that could jeopardize the safety of thousands of passengers if not resolved swiftly. Valerie spent the next several hours poring over engineering reports. Each time she found a potential clue, a missed inspection note, a design oversight, she would jot it down. Meanwhile, Ron directed a group of mechanics to remove the suspect valves from the grounded planes. Their goal was to conduct a detailed bench test on each component. In the center of the hangar, they had set up a mobile diagnostic station. Dr. Noor took point, carefully connecting each valve to a hydraulic test rig. The contraption hissed and clicked as fluid was pumped through at varying pressures and temperatures. Valerie observed from behind the safety partition, monitoring readouts on a computer screen. Look at the pressure fluctuation, Dr. Noor said, pointing. The needle on the gauge danced erratically. That's not normal. This valve can't maintain stable pressure at mid-range temperatures. It's as if a seal isn't holding. If that happens mid-flight, Tim finished her sentence grimly. The pilot could lose partial control of the flaps or experience severe lag. Valerie inhaled, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. A single flawed component in a plane's hydraulic system was enough to threaten hundreds of lives. Have you found signs of metal fatigue or substandard materials? She asked Dr. Noor. She nodded. It looks like the edges of these internal seals were machined improperly. We suspect subpar manufacturing standards. Some cracks are forming microscopically. When you combine that with temperature changes, the cracks widen, letting fluid leak out or, worse, get trapped in areas it's not supposed to be. Valerie stepped away from the station, scanning the area for Tim, who stood near a stack of crates, phone in hand. Tim, we'll need to cross-reference every plane's serial number to see if it uses valves from this particular batch. Boeing might have distributed them to multiple airlines. We're probably looking at an airworthiness directive from the FAA, maybe even an emergency one. Tim nodded, brow furrowed. I'm on it. I'll call the folks in DC and see if we can get the ball rolling. But you know how they are. They'll want ironclad proof before grounding a whole fleet. There's going to be pushback, especially from airlines that can't afford more cancellations. Valerie set her jaw. Better pushback than a tragedy. We'll gather as much evidence as we need to force a directive, if that's what it takes. Over the next 2 days, the pace of the investigation only intensified. Valerie barely slept, bouncing between field inspections at the hangar and late-night conference calls with FAA leadership. She also found herself fielding calls from airline executives who were panicking over the potential cost implications of pulling numerous 737s out of service. "Coleman, we acknowledge the seriousness of your findings," a crisp corporate voice had said on the phone. "But do you really believe this warrants such drastic measures? We've flown these planes for years without major incidents." Valerie had replied evenly, "Safety is non-negotiable. We have documented evidence of manufacturing defects. If these valves fail mid-flight, we're talking about a catastrophic scenario. The FAA is prepared to issue an emergency airworthiness directive if needed." Behind the scenes, a storm brewed. Boeing representatives, though cooperative in sharing technical data, worried about reputational damage. Airlines raised concerns about operational chaos and plummeting profits. Meanwhile, the public remained largely unaware, as the story had not yet reached mainstream media. Valerie knew that if word got out prematurely, it could spawn mass flight cancellations and public panic. Balancing transparency with the need for thorough investigation was always a precarious line to walk. Amid all this, she felt an undercurrent of something personal. Some officials questioned her credibility, not overtly, but with subtle undertones. She sensed that her rapid ascent within the FAA, and perhaps her identity as a black woman with immense authority, rankled those who were unaccustomed to such leadership. More than once, she received queries framed as if she needed extra verification on her conclusions. Over time, she learned to recognize that skepticism wasn't purely about the evidence. One night, bleary-eyed from lack of sleep, she remembered the incident at Atlanta. She could still picture Officer Richard's glare, his reluctance to accept her badge, his immediate leap to doubt. The parallel with certain skeptics now, in the midst of an aviation crisis, was uncanny. In both scenarios, her expertise was second-guessed, despite all the proof she carried. She resolved to push forward, determined to let her precise, evidence-based work speak louder than any biases. By the middle of the week, Valerie's phone exploded with calls and texts. The test data was conclusive, multiple valves exhibited the same flaw, and the problem likely extended to an entire production batch. Tim had discovered that these valves were installed in at least 50 Boeing 737s across 4 different US airlines, not counting smaller carriers that might have picked them up on the secondary market. This was bigger than anyone had first assumed. Realizing the urgency, the FAA scheduled a high-level briefing in Washington, D.C. They wanted Valerie's first-hand account of the data. The plan was to coordinate with the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, and possibly the Department of Transportation to lay down immediate remedial measures. "I can't leave Seattle until we finalize the bench tests," Valerie argued during a tense phone call with her immediate supervisor, Brenda Thompson, who was based at FAA headquarters. "They want me to confirm results in person, and I'm still gathering additional part samples." "Tim is good, but I'm the lead on this," Brenda sighed. "We need you here, Valerie. The airline CEOs are already screaming about potential groundings, and the deputy administrator wants a face-to-face. This could shape up to be as big as the 737 MAX crisis if we don't handle it carefully." At the mention of the 737 MAX, Valerie felt a chill. That crisis had shaken public confidence in Boeing and the FAA, exposing regulatory lapses and fostering global outrage. Nobody wanted a repeat. All right, she relented. I'll fly out tomorrow. But we can't drag this out. Lives are on the line. Before she hung up, Brenda added, "Take care of yourself, Valerie. I know this has been an uphill battle. Just keep your composure." On a drizzly morning, Valerie boarded a flight back to Washington, D.C. This time, she passed through Seattle-Tacoma security without incident, her official documents recognized immediately. She found it ironic that, compared to the fiasco in Atlanta, the TSA officers here treated her with deference once they realized her position. She buried that annoyance, focusing on the bigger picture. During the flight, Valerie reviewed her notes, meticulously ensuring she had every detail ready for the upcoming briefing. She also thought about the chain of events that could follow if the FAA decided to ground dozens of Boeing 737s. The economic impact would be enormous, countless flights cancelled, airlines losing millions, and potentially thousands of passengers inconvenienced or stranded. But the alternative was far worse. The risk of a catastrophic in-flight failure. Landing at Reagan National Airport, she felt a sense of déjà vu. She had been here many times, but this mission carried more weight. A government car whisked her to the FAA headquarters, a modern building not far from Capitol Hill. She rode the elevator to the top floor, where she was met by Brenda Thompson, a tall woman with a confident stride and sharp eyes. "Glad you made it," Brenda said briskly. "They're waiting for you in conference room A." Inside, a dozen suits lined a large oval table, the air thick with tension. Representatives from Boeing, major airlines, the NTSB, and senior FAA officials eyed Valerie as she took her seat. She recognized some from prior investigations. Others were new, but their expressions betrayed skepticism or worry. Brenda introduced her. "This is Valerie Coleman, our lead accident investigator overseeing the Boeing 737 hydraulic valve anomaly. Miss Coleman, please share your findings." Valerie stood, projecting calm authority she had spent years refining. PowerPoint slides flicked on behind her as she began. "Over the past week, we've identified multiple servo valve assemblies failing to maintain consistent hydraulic pressure in the wing flap controls. The defect is rooted in a manufacturing flaw, likely subpar machining of internal seals. Preliminary estimates suggest this impacts at least 50 aircraft, but the number could rise as we expand our inspection." She presented graphs, photos of valves with visible cracks, and test results showing erratic pressure readings. Murmurs spread through the room. After she finished, a middle-aged man in a grey suit, an airline exec with a name plaque reading Marcus Albright, raised a hand. "You propose grounding dozens of planes, Miss Coleman?" he asked, his tone polite but edged. "We've operated these jets for years with minimal incident. Shouldn't we implement targeted inspections first, and only ground planes proven defective?" Valerie inhaled. "Targeted inspections are part of the process, but the defect can be asymptomatic until it's dangerously advanced. Once the valve fails, the plane's flaps become unpredictable. We can't risk a mid-air emergency. A cautious approach, grounding any 737 that falls within the suspect batch, may be the only way to guarantee passenger safety until we confirm each valve's integrity." Albright exchanged glances with Boeing reps, who shifted uncomfortably. The memory of the 737 MAX fiasco hung unspoken over the table. Another official asked about timelines and potential spare parts. Valerie explained that replacement valves might be available, but verifying their quality could take time. The tension in the room mounted as each participant realized the enormous cost and reputational damage that could follow. Finally, the FAA deputy administrator cleared his throat. "Thank you, Miss Coleman. We need a day to deliberate. Boeing and the airlines will have a chance to present additional data. but your findings are alarming. Rest assured, the FAA won't sacrifice safety for expediency. After the briefing, Valerie stayed in DC for another day, providing further clarifications and discussing possible airworthiness directives. Meanwhile, the rumblings of a looming crisis began to leak. Journalists caught wind of the mystery flaw in Boeing's 737 valves, and within hours, mainstream media outlets began calling the FAA for statements. "Miss Coleman," Brenda said hurriedly, catching Valerie in the hallway, "there's a news crew from CNN outside. They want an on-camera statement. We're coordinating an official response. But would you mind talking with them briefly?" Valerie's heart sank. She had hoped for more time to solidify the technical details before the media spun a sensational story. Still, she agreed, understanding the importance of transparent communication in preventing public panic. Stepping out to the building's front, she was met by a flurry of camera flashes and the hum of microphones. A correspondent from CNN introduced herself, microphone in hand. "Miss Coleman, can you confirm reports that the FAA is considering grounding Boeing 737 aircraft due to a critical flaw in the hydraulic system?" Valerie, measured as ever, spoke in a clear, calm tone. "We're currently investigating a potential manufacturing defect that might affect certain Boeing 737 models. The FAA's priority is passenger safety. If the data warrants, we will take appropriate action, including grounding planes, until the issue is resolved." One of the reporters chimed in, "Is this a repeat of the 737 MAX crisis?" Valerie shook her head gently. "Every case is unique. This situation involves hydraulic valves and not flight control software. But we take any safety concerns seriously. Our investigation is ongoing. Once we have conclusive findings, we'll make a formal recommendation." She refrained from disclosing further specifics, not wanting to incite undue alarm. Even so, by evening, the headline screamed variations of Boeing 737 in trouble again, and FAA investigator raises alarm. Valerie's phone buzzed relentlessly with messages, some supportive, others accusatory, and a few that were outright hostile. But that came with the territory. Everyone had an opinion, and the narrative was quickly spiraling beyond her direct control. That night, Valerie tried to rest in a small hotel room near Capitol Hill, but sleep was elusive. Her mind teemed with images of catastrophic in-flight malfunctions. She thought about families flying for reunions, business people traveling for conferences, all the lives that depended on these planes being safe. A single oversight could unravel into a national tragedy, and it was her job to sound the alarm if the data pointed that way. She also couldn't shake the recollection of Officer Richard's cold skepticism at Hartsfield-Jackson. Even in her own domain of expertise, she faced doubt. Would these same biases color the decisions of those who were now evaluating her findings? Am I going to be second-guessed again? She wondered. Although her track record spoke volumes, prejudice sometimes found subtle ways to insert itself, especially in times of corporate crisis. To steady herself, she opened her laptop and typed up a meticulous summary of every test result, every physical inspection, and every relevant piece of data from Boeing's engineering logs. She included references to Title 14 of the Code of Federal Regulations, the rules that governed airworthiness in the United States, and cited them to show exactly how these flawed valves violated regulatory standards. It was the best weapon she had against suspicion or dismissiveness, indisputable evidence laid out in plain view. At dawn, Valerie was summoned for another round of meetings. This time, the atmosphere was even more charged. Major airline CEOs, Boeing officials, top FAA administrators, and lawyers crammed into a large conference room. Some participants were connected via video conferencing from Seattle, Chicago, and Atlanta. The FAA Deputy Administrator kicked things off. We've reviewed Miss Coleman's data. Boeing, do you have any counter-evidence or updates? A Boeing spokesperson cleared his throat. We acknowledge the servo valve defects in certain production batches. However, we believe the issue may not be as widespread as the FAA's initial assessment suggests. We propose further targeted inspections rather than a broad grounding. An airline rep jumped in. Our planes need to keep flying. We can't just park them based on an unproven hypothesis. Valerie's jaw tightened, but she maintained composure. We're not talking about a hypothesis. The bench tests show metal cracks in multiple samples. Considering these planes are near the same production timeline, the risk is real. Let's be practical. Another airline lawyer interjected. Even if these valves have micro cracks, some planes have flown thousands of cycles without a single incident. Doesn't that indicate the flaw might never manifest into a real hazard? Valerie felt her heart pound. She stood, speaking clearly. A single incident could mean hundreds of lives at stake. The question isn't whether we've been lucky so far, it's whether we want to risk a catastrophic failure because we ignored early warnings. We have enough documented anomalies to justify an emergency airworthiness directive under Title 14 CFR, section dealing with defective or unapproved parts. Tension coiled in the air like a drawn bowstring. Everyone seemed to wait for the FAA Deputy Administrator's verdict. After a tense pause, he spoke slowly, eyes scanning the group. We will issue a special airworthiness information bulletin, urging immediate inspection of any 737 that includes the suspect batch of valves. If inspection reveals defects, the plane is grounded until the valve is replaced. This is non-negotiable. A flurry of protests erupted from airline reps, but the deputy administrator raised a hand to silence them. This is about safety, Miss. Coleman's investigation has provided enough evidence that we cannot, in good conscience, allow these planes to fly unchecked. Within hours, the FAA circulated the official bulletin. News outlets picked it up, and soon travelers nationwide faced abrupt flight cancellations or delays. On social media, hashtags like hashtag 737valves and hashtag airline safety began trending. Some users applauded the FAA's decisive action, grateful for caution. Others decried it as an overreach, complaining about inconvenience and suspecting hidden motives. Valerie found herself in the crosshairs of both praise and criticism. Her email overflowed with interviews requests. Some journalists called her a hero, others questioned her qualifications. The contradictory narrative swirled around her, creating an emotional maelstrom. Through it all, she reminded herself that every grounded plane was a potential disaster averted if the valve was indeed flawed. At one point, Tim Randall called her from Seattle. "This is insane," he said, his voice echoing with the sounds of a bustling hangar. "We've got lines of planes waiting for inspection, passengers stuck at airports, and phone calls from angry airline managers. But guess what? We've already found 2 more valves with the exact same defect. That's enough to shut up the naysayers, right?" Valerie exhaled. "You'd hope so. But corporate denial can be pretty stubborn. Hang in there. We're doing the right thing." She hung up, staring at her computer screen. She was scheduled for yet another press briefing in 2 hours. Her mind flashed to the meltdown with Officer Richards, reminding her how quickly people could judge without evidence. Now, with actual data in hand, she still found some refusing to see the truth. What else can I do but keep working, she thought. Meanwhile, at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport, word of Valerie's involvement in the high-profile investigation filtered through the ranks. Officer Richards heard from colleagues that the woman he gave a hard time was actually the FAA's top investigator, now making national headlines. Embarrassment, and perhaps a flicker of guilt, wormed its way into his mind. Richard's supervisors, alerted to the social media chatter, someone had witnessed the confrontation and tweeted about it, started an internal review of his actions. It turned out he'd racked up a number of complaints from other travelers, mostly minorities, alleging rude behavior or excessive scrutiny. Under mounting pressure, the TSA launched a deeper investigation into his conduct. Although Richards tried to downplay the incident with Valerie as just following protocol, the world was changing, and so was the TSA's tolerance for repeated complaints. Eventually, disciplinary measures were taken. Ironically, while Valerie was busy preventing a potential aviation disaster, karma was creeping up on the man who had arrogantly dismissed her credentials. He found himself on suspension, uncertain if he'd ever return to the job. Back in Washington, D.C., the situation escalated further. Major airlines scrambled to comply with the inspections, but faced severe operational strain. One airline in particular, Transcoast Airways, had a significant share of the suspect valves. They risked grounding half their 737 fleet, which threatened chaos for their schedules and revenue. Desperate, Transcoast CEO Edmund Wells called a press conference. He blasted the FAA's directive, claiming the data was inconclusive. He accused investigators of overreacting and ignoring the fact that no actual crashes had occurred. The subtext was clear. He was blaming Valerie Coleman's alarmist approach, even though he didn't name her explicitly. Valerie, watching the press conference on a TV in the FAA break room, felt her anger rise. She was about to stand up and shut off the TV when Brenda Thompson entered. "Don't let this rattle you," Brenda said. "He's trying to protect his bottom line. We're still on solid ground, technically and ethically." "I just hate seeing them twist the story," Valerie replied, her voice tight. "All they care about is profit, not the fact that these planes could fail under the right or wrong conditions." Brenda nodded sympathetically. "We have the data. We have the authority. This isn't a PR game. It's aviation safety. Stand firm." As the days wore on, Valerie divided her time between multiple tasks. On one front, she was liaising with Boeing engineers to refine the inspection process and accelerate the replacement of faulty valves. On another, she was working with the FAA legal team to handle the onslaught of challenges from airlines like Transcoast. Meanwhile, she also oversaw a deeper dive into manufacturing records to understand precisely how this defect slipped through. That deeper dive took her to Everett, Washington, where Boeing's sprawling production facilities turned out thousands of jets. Accompanied by Tim and Dr. Nor, she interviewed line supervisors, quality assurance managers, and even forklift operators. In an industrial labyrinth of steel and rivets, she discovered corners where human error and corporate pressure intersected. One manager confided that the batch of servo valves in question had been rushed due to high demand. "We were behind schedule," he admitted. "Deadlines were looming, and we did what we could to keep the line moving. Maybe some corners got cut on the final checks." Those words sent a chill down Valerie's spine. It reminded her of previous aviation disasters where a minor oversight or cost-saving measure snowballed into tragedy. Here, the line between profit and safety had blurred yet again. She painstakingly documented every admission, every piece of evidence indicating that manufacturing standards had been compromised. Weeks of investigative work culminated in a congressional hearing on aviation safety. Valerie was among those called to testify before a Senate subcommittee, along with representatives from Boeing, the FAA, and major airlines. The hearing room buzzed with tension as camera crews set up, reporters scribbled notes, and senators shuffled papers. Valerie wore a simple navy suit, her FAA badge pinned neatly. When her name was called, she sat at the witness table, aware that the entire room was watching every nuance of her expression. A senator from a state with a major Boeing presence leaned forward. "Miss Coleman, can you state for the record why you believe these 737s warranted emergency inspections and partial groundings?" Valerie spoke clearly into the microphone, summarizing the test results, the discovered manufacturing lapses, and the potential for catastrophic flap failure. She concluded, "The evidence is unequivocal. The risk, while it might seem small to some, is unacceptable when human lives are on the line." The senator nodded gravely. Another senator, more skeptical, chimed in. "We've heard from airline CEOs that no crashes have occurred. How do you respond to claims that this is an overreaction?" Valerie's gaze swept the room. Aviation safety relies on prevention, not reaction to tragedy after it occurs. If a problem is identified, waiting for a disaster to confirm it is a betrayal of public trust. Historical cases, including the DC-10 cargo door issue decades ago and more recent 737 MAX tragedies, show how lethal delayed action can be. A hush fell. Across the table, Edmund Wells from Transcoast Airways fidgeted, his expression unreadable. Boeing's representatives stared at the polished surface before them. Valerie's words had resonated, or at least stirred discomfort. After the hearing adjourned, Brenda caught up with Valerie in the hallway. "You were fantastic," she said. "Articulate, firm, and unwavering. The Senate subcommittee seems supportive. Looks like the airlines won't be able to wiggle out of this." Valerie smiled, relieved but exhausted. Each victory in aviation safety was hard-won, layered with political and corporate friction. Yet, hearing even a hint of support from lawmakers felt like progress. In the following weeks, evidence of more flawed valves appeared as additional jets were inspected. Media outlets that had initially questioned the FAA's directive began to shift tone. Reporters highlighted that, indeed, manufacturing shortcuts had likely endangered public safety. Boeing announced a comprehensive recall of the defective valves, and airlines scrambled to repair their fleets. Valerie found a measure of vindication in these developments. The data she had worked so hard to gather spoke for itself. Journalists who once repeated airline execs' talking points now described her as the calm voice that prevented another aviation disaster. Her name trended online, accompanied by praise from pilot associations, passenger advocacy groups, and even certain corners of the political spectrum that valued strong regulatory oversight. Quietly, a sense of relief settled over her. "We did it," she thought. "We exposed the problem in time." But she also recognized that safety in aviation is never a static victory. There would always be a next crisis, a next flaw, a next set of corporate denials. She simply hoped that each battle made the system stronger. Some time later, Valerie was asked to return to Atlanta for a speaking engagement at a major aviation safety conference, to present on proactive measures in identifying manufacturing defects. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd left Hartsfield-Jackson weeks before, under a cloud of suspicion at the security gate. Now she would return as a recognized authority, admired by many in the field. As she walked through the terminal, she felt a mix of familiarity and tension. She approached the security checkpoint, noticing new signage that stressed courtesy, fairness, and thoroughness in screening. When she presented her badge to a young TSA officer, the response was immediate respect. He smiled and said, "Welcome back, Miss Coleman. We appreciate the work you do." In that brief moment, Valerie felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The sting of her past experience remained, but at least the environment seemed to be changing, if only bit by bit. She proceeded to the conference hall, a section of the airport reserved for large events. The room was filled with professionals, pilots, mechanics, safety inspectors, airline executives. She took the stage to a round of applause, the lights shining on her face as she cleared her throat to speak. I'm grateful for this opportunity to discuss the lessons we learned from the recent Boeing 737 valve investigation, she began. One of the key lessons is that safety depends on recognizing and rectifying problems before they become tragedies. That means we must be willing to listen, even to voices we might dismiss out of prejudice or habit, and follow the data wherever it leads. She glanced up, momentarily catching her own reflection in the projector screen. This was a far cry from the humiliating confrontation at security. Her journey had come full circle, illuminating a path for others who might face similar doubts. During a break, Valerie sat on a bench near a tall window that overlooked the runways. Atlanta's expansive tarmac seemed to go on forever, dotted with planes landing and taking off in synchronized chaos. She heard a timid voice call her name. Turning, she saw a familiar figure, Officer B. Richards. Out of uniform, he approached slowly, his shoulders slumped. "What are you doing here?" Valerie asked gently, not sure what to expect. He sighed, avoiding her eyes. "I'm no longer with the TSA," he said. "I'm actually here. I heard you were speaking. I wanted to apologize. I got suspended after the incident that morning, and then, well, some investigations into my past actions came up. I ended up getting let go." Valerie studied his face. He seemed genuinely contrite, a far cry from the abrasive man at the checkpoint. "I'm sorry it came to that," she said quietly. "I never intended for you to lose your job." He shook his head. "That was on me. I treated too many people unfairly, especially people of color. I wanted to tell you that what happened opened my eyes. I've been doing a lot of soul-searching since. I realize I was, well, bigoted. I'm trying to turn my life around." A swirl of emotions churned within Valerie, empathy, sadness, and perhaps a modicum of relief. It was never easy to see someone face consequences that heavy, but maybe the system was better off. "I appreciate you saying that," she replied. "I hope you find a better path." They shared an awkward silence before Richards nodded and walked away, leaving Valerie to reflect on the hard truth of karma's bite. It didn't erase the frustration and hurt she'd felt, but it offered a form of closure she hadn't expected. Valerie's speech at the conference proved influential. The FAA, spurred by public and congressional support, began tightening manufacturing oversight regulations. Boeing cooperated in drafting new protocols for servo valve quality checks. Airlines that once balked at the cost recognized the benefits of safer operations in the long run. In the weeks that followed, national news outlets ran stories highlighting how near misses in aviation often go unheralded. Journalists discussed how an investigator's diligence can avert calamity. Valerie's name inevitably surfaced, her profile rising. Some commentators noted her background and identity, praising her resilience in a field traditionally dominated by older white men. Yet Valerie resisted the celebrity label. For her, it was all about the work, methodical, unrelenting, vital. She continued to lead investigations into other potential flaws, ranging from avionics software to structural materials. Whenever she encountered doubts or prejudice, she leaned on her track record and her unwavering commitment to data-driven conclusions. Behind closed doors, the FAA also examined whether racial or gender biases had impeded investigators in the past. Brenda Thompson spearheaded an internal committee, inviting Valerie to share her experiences. While the changes might not be immediate, seeds were planted for a more inclusive atmosphere within the agency. Late one evening, Valerie sat at her desk in Washington, D.C., sifting through another round of part failure reports. The daily onslaught of potential issues never ceased, but her calm demeanor remained intact. She'd learned to compartmentalize, thoroughly investigate each claim, escalate what was serious, and swiftly resolve smaller matters. She glanced at a framed photo on her desk. Her father, an Army aircraft mechanic, who had instilled in her a passion for flying machines. She remembered his advice: keep your head high, keep learning, and show them what you can do. She felt a pang of nostalgia. Her father had passed away years ago, but his words guided her every step. Her phone buzzed. It was Tim calling from Seattle. "Guess what?" he said. "They're naming you Investigator of the Year at the annual FAA Awards. You better start writing an acceptance speech." Valerie was momentarily speechless. While she'd gathered accolades before, this one felt deeply meaningful. It acknowledged not just a single case, but her consistent, tireless approach to safeguarding aviation. "Wow," she finally said. Thank you for telling me, Tim. Couldn't have gone to anyone else," Tim added. "Now get ready, because you'll be in the spotlight again." Valerie hung up, letting the news wash over her. She thought about the path that had brought her here, the humiliating stares at security, the corporate denials, the sleepless nights. Every obstacle had refined her resolve. "I did it, Dad," she silently reflected. "I made a difference." Months later, after the dust settled on the Boeing 737 valve fiasco, the recalled parts had been replaced, and the grounded planes were back in the skies with new safety measures in place. No accidents had occurred, a testament to the power of timely intervention. Valerie found herself once more at Hartsfield-Jackson, preparing to board a plane for a well-deserved vacation. She couldn't remember the last time she traveled for leisure instead of an investigation. As she approached the security checkpoint, she noticed a new training poster behind the TSA podium, emphasizing professionalism and respect for travelers' varied backgrounds. The line moved efficiently. The TSA officer, a middle-aged woman with a warm smile, greeted her politely, checked her ID, and waved her through. No second-guessing, no suspicious stares. It was a mundane moment on the surface, but to Valerie it felt symbolic, a small, quiet victory in the larger battle against bias. With her carry-on in tow, she walked through the concourse, spotting a newsstand featuring a magazine with a cover story on women who are changing aviation. She smiled, remembering how far she had come and how many new voices were now joining the field. At the gate, she took a seat by the window, watching planes come and go. Engines roared, and for a moment she reflected on the miracle of flight, something so simple to travelers, yet the product of countless safety checks, engineering feats, and dedicated professionals behind the scenes. When her boarding group was called, she rose and walked onto the jet bridge, stepping into the airplane's aisle with a sense of both relief and exhilaration. In a world often weighed down by cynicism and prejudice, she had carved out a role that mattered, protecting lives and proving her worth by the plain truth of her accomplishments. The plane took off, carrying Valerie into the clouds. Far below, the runways and buildings of Atlanta shrank from view. The horizon stretched out before her, full of possibilities, just like her career, just like the future of aviation safety. She leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes, thankful for the chance to keep flying forward. Moments of doubt and prejudice can't stop true determination from rising to meet the challenge. Valerie Coleman's journey from being underestimated at an airport security gate to safeguarding countless passengers proves how integrity and expertise ultimately speak louder than bias. Facing corporate denials, media scrutiny, and personal attacks, she never wavered from her mission to ground dangerous jets before tragedy could take flight. The result was not just a safer fleet of planes, but also a powerful testament that anyone, regardless of background, can hold authority and save lives. If this story sparked your own determination or opened your eyes to the complexities of aviation safety, help spread the word. Share it with friends and family, leave a comment with your thoughts, and most importantly, subscribe to this channel so you won't miss future stories that shine a light on real-life courage and resilience. Your support helps keep these narratives soaring, one story at a time.